to bring a cooperative ethos, approach, and our cooperative values and principles to life in our philanthropy and in our campaigning. And we launched our Building Communities of the Future Together strategy 18 months ago, and it has innovation and creativity at its core, and investing in individuals is a huge part of that. That is the key ingredient, if you like, for our £4.5 million Young Gamechangers Fund that you'll hear a little more of on this call. It's designed to put resources and training and capability directly into the hands of the campaigners, disruptors, activists, leaders, social entrepreneurs, and of course, the cooperators of the future. And that idea of funding individuals emerged during the listen and learn sessions that we held during the development of our strategy. There's clearly a gap in funding for individual young people who aspire to deliver social change in their communities. And when we were considering this idea, we understood absolutely the potential that it had to be impactful. And this is a fund which is driven by impact, of course, on the young game changers themselves, on their communities, defined however, but also our ambition is for this fund to act as a gigantic pilot project exemplar for the wider funding sector to see if other funders can lift inspiration, if you like, from this approach of funding individuals. And we're hugely enthusiastic to share everything that we learn, and this is an important step today in that direction. We want our experience to help other funders to consider whether or not this is an approach that will work for them. We know, of course, that we were not the first to consider funding individuals, and the Game Changers Fund stands on the shoulders of the many organizations that have done this kind of work before. And of course, that leads us to the scoping study. And I'm hugely grateful to everybody that collaborated with us in the development of that hugely important piece of work. And enormous thanks to you, Asamina, as well, for the leadership that you've displayed and for the academic rigor that you've brought to this piece of work. So thanks to everybody for your interest. And thank you for coming along today. And with that, I will hand back to you, Asamina.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you. I'll do a short introduction to the scoping study that informed our first funding to individuals, and I'll share my slides in a minute. Just give me a second. Is everybody okay with seeing the slides? Okay, thank you, Emily. I guess I'll start with it has been almost a year ago, actually, that we started the journey for this scoping study. As we kind of started thinking about how we will design our funding to individuals, we knew already that other funders were doing that for many years. So we really wanted to make our funding as designed as evidence-based as possible. So I will very quickly talk about our methodology, because I think there are some interesting things to share, learning of how we did this with other funders. It was our learning and impact team together with the funding team that we designed the learning questions for this study. And I'm sure you'll recognize the questions that yourselves are asking when you design new funds. Our key questions were about, what are the other models or approaches to funding individual with a focus on young people? What are the risks to funding individuals? What additional support will young people need as we invest in them? What are potential models of developing partnerships with other delivery partners? And what are the key learnings from other funders? Following the design of our approach to the scoping study, we conducted, together with the funding and partnerships team members, interviews with other funders, many of which are joining today in this call. And thank you so much for being part of the scoping study and sharing so generously your learnings with us. And then between April and July, we did our data analysis and complemented of the interviews complemented by desk-based research of evaluation reports from other funding programs and other online information that existed. Overall, we looked at 20 funding programs investing in individuals and interviewed 16 funders who are mainly based in the UK, but some of them are funding individuals internationally. I'm not going to give you an overview of all the funding programs we looked at, but I just have here an indicative list because it gives us a flavor of the different approaches that funders can have when they fund individuals, and also some indicative levels of funding. For example, Camden Giving, they have a project model of funding. They give up to £2,000 to individuals. They can apply for 2 consecutive funding rounds, the individuals, with their funding, which is called We Make Camden, and the duration is 1 year. Blakegrave Trust, thank you for being present in this meeting, has the Challenge and Change funding. They offer to young people up to £10,000 for a year, unrestricted funding. So we had project funding, unrestricted funding. Big Change with their Big Education Challenge. They were giving funding. They followed the challenge prizes approach. If you know Nesta and innovation kind of organizations, they are experts in the challenge prize approach, where they give rewards for individuals and group of people who can effectively solve a challenge. And in this way, they kind of open a public competition for the individuals who can, most effectively share the challenge. You can see the funding levels are quite higher, and similarly, the duration of the funding can be between 6 months to 3 years. Virgin Money Foundation, who's also present in this meeting, has the Young Changemakers Fellowship. They follow the fellowship model, similarly to the Churchill Fellowships, which is a more short-term opportunities for further study, research, professional development of opportunities. Again, the level of the funding can be between 10 up to 10K, with additional up to 5K for travel expenses, and the duration could be from 6 months extending to 12 months. I just wanted to give you like a flair of the different approaches, but we've also seen in our scoping study that different funders had different approaches to also designing the fund. First of all, they all ensure, funding to individuals is aligned with the charity law. Quite a few of them conducted research before starting the funding. They had expert advisors, and they kind of did consultation, listening, and in many cases, the funding to individuals came as an evolution of the strategic thinking over the years. Some of the funders had a pilot stage in their individuals, and some of you may already know the ladder of participation, famous by Einstein, who developed it back in the 70s. I have indicatively different funders here, and we've categorized them in different levels, I guess, of the ladder based on the different approaches they had in designing the fund and how they involved people with lived experiences or other stakeholders in the design phase. For example, the Youth Climate Justice Fund is a fund that is completely designed from the start from individual young people who actually do the fundraising for the fund. So designed, asked, requested by the young people, designed by young people, for young people, focused on climate justice. Blakegrave Trust delegated power to young people to design the fund, while other approaches might be partnership, like the Virgin Money Foundation, or more of a consultation phase in the initial stages, for example, from young people or other people with lived experience that were the funding was relevant to them. Level and duration of the fund, I just indicated that the duration is usually short term, but we do have some examples of longer term and higher awards to individuals. Most often the funds to individuals in hardship are up to £2,500, and they are to be spent over a few months. We see social action funds up to 15,000, they are up to 1 year, but when they are higher amounts of money, up to 200,000, they can be up to 2 to 3 years to be spent and completed. And similarly for professional development funds, we have between 2,000 or 300,000, and they can be up for 6 years. Quite often the duration, but most importantly, the level of the funding reflects the ambition of the funder, how transformational they want, the funding to individual to be, either for the individual or for the communities. And also reflects the level of the ideas or the professional development of the individual. If the idea for social change of the individual is at the early stages, we've seen that the funding tends to be at the lower level as well. One of our advice that was given from funders during the scoping study was make sure when you design your fund, you create your application form, you're clear about what type of individual you're targeting and whether you want to fund ideas that are in the early stages or more developed ideas. That can help the funder not to be inundated with applications, but also create a more impactful fund. Application process, most of the funders highlighted that they have a simple process with small number of questions, one stage. Quite a lot of funders provide pre-application support, offering options for the application to be submitted in different formats, catering for accessibility needs, and some funders had also a nomination process rather than an open call. Outreach, a lot of the funders emphasized the need to ensure that the funding was inclusive, but also reached individuals that they wouldn't have reached with the existing networks. And they achieve that through delivery partner organizations, reaching out to new organizations they've never collaborated with before, attending events, through knowledge partners and experts in the particular thematic areas of the fund, using more traditional ways like the website, social media, newsletter, Q&As and webinars, or through networks, and word of mouth has been also a successful approach. Some funders emphasized they didn't want to, reach out the usual suspects of this type of funding, and for that reason, they used people with lived experience to disseminate through their own networks the funding. And almost all of the funders emphasize how they're trying to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in their funding by monitoring diversity, setting quotas, looking carefully who is accessing the fund, explaining the need to collect personal data from the beginning of the application process so that they can compare, who's accessing, who is not accessing the fund, and tracking diversity, equity, and inclusion over the years for long-term funding. The language for communications is also important. Funders use explicit language in application of who is it that they're trying to access with their funding. They check the language for accessibility and inclusion with special advisors, and they change the wording of the fund so that it's different from what they traditionally do. I guess one of the key questions a funder asks when we are more used to funding organizations and we are now asked to invest in individuals is about how do you really disperse the funding. So we found lots of different approaches useful to share with you in this presentation. Some funders do direct transfer of the money to the individuals, including young people. They don't ask for receipts. Others use the Open Collective, which is an online platform that enables transparency in this process. Other organizations use delivery partners or purchase directly equipment that the individuals are asking. Some funders use prepaid cards, or we did have an example of a funder who set up a separate entity to distribute the funding to individuals. Monitoring is always light touch and reporting. The onus is usually on the funder, not to the individual, and the information of what is the monitoring requested data is provided from the start to the individual. It's usually a 1 or 2 stage process involving like a check-in mid-year and end of year reporting, or a lot of funders also prefer to have ongoing communication, for example, through WhatsApp or just to follow the young people through the social media to look at the progress, so that they don't have, to continually ask the individuals about what they're doing and the most up-to-date activities. We found some more creative approaches. A couple of funders share that they don't want, traditional monitoring processes. They want to create more progress reporting where they bring the individuals together to share what they learn, so that it's, a combination of peer learning, but also the funder gets to understand better the progress of the individuals. And finishing this short presentation, program evaluation has been highlighted as important. Some funders have more informal data collection by themselves that enables them to improve their funding. Or some others design more formal program evaluation from the start. Lots of the funders we talked to emphasize that they did the evaluation at the pilot phase, and they use the theory of change approach. We've seen lots of combination of quantitative data collections and qualitative data collections being used. Some funders do pre and post project evaluation, and a lot of the funders emphasize it's important to do process evaluation about the approach in the funding, from the application to monitoring and end of project evaluation and impact evaluation. What has been the impact of the funding? And in our scoping study, we have referenced some really excellent program evaluation reports. And last, some funders we've seen involve their youth advisors in the design of the evaluation process. Finishing this short, overview of the different stages in funding to individuals, I would like to highlight legacy that we've seen. Some funders provide funding after, the first pot of funding finishes. They provide ad hoc funding to the individuals if they have, they want to do an event or they want to do further fundraising. If, an opportunity emerges, they have dedicated funding for that. Others have follow-up funding, for example, from project funding to organizations who want to create their own entity, or they support the setup of an organization, or they offer paid opportunities to the young people they invested in. We've seen lots of funders having a pastoral care kind of support following the end of the funding, or doing lots of networking events, like organizing, bringing together the individuals at the end of the funding, and 1 year, 2 years later, linking them to other networks, or even setting up an alumni network. And the last, which I guess is part of this session as well, a lot of funders have been saying that they're trying to influence the sector, influence other funders on how they can also invest in individuals. And we're hoping this is the beginning for us of this approach. So now I would like to introduce Jenny, our funding and partnerships manager, who would like to talk very briefly about our very own Young Gamechangers Fund. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Asamina. First of all, can I just double check that everybody is on mute before we get started on the next part of the presentation? Because we have heard a few people popping up in the background. So that'd be great if everybody could just check that. So as Asamina said, I'm Jenny Barnes. I'm the Funding and Partnerships Manager for the Co-op Foundation. I'm a white woman with shoulder-length ginger hair. I'm wearing a blue top and I'm sat in my home office. Unfortunately, I don't have a bookshelf behind me, so I can't join in that description. Now, so you've seen our branding on the previous slides, which again was created by young people. However, we haven't yet explained what the Young Gamechangers Fund is. Now, we've learned so much from the scoping study and from other funders who have more experience in funding individuals than us. But I guess I would say the key takeaways from that learning for me have been that we really need to address the power imbalance between those holding the funding and making the decisions to those who are taking action to positively change our communities. We learned that individuals have less constraints and are often able to find more innovative solutions to complex societal problems. And finally, we wanted to create systematic change by influencing the wider funding sector to consider giving more direct funding to individuals, which we hope that we can do through being completely transparent about our experience of doing this. And so from this, the Young Gamechangers Fund was created. Now, this fund is a £4.5 million fund, which is match funded through Co-op Foundation and the I Will Fund. Now, admittedly, not all of the funding is able to be used to fund individuals, but a third of it is. So that's the part that we're going to be focusing on today. Now, we knew as a funder that funding individuals can come with more risk, but we equally knew that it could also come with more reward. So with that in mind, it was absolutely a risk that we decided was worth taking. And to do that, we knew that we needed to put in the right support and the tools for the young people who would be receiving the funding. We were also acutely aware that we did not hold all those tools ourselves. So to be able to fund individuals and support them in developing their ideas into reality, we needed to partner with some delivery partners. So that's why we partnered with Global Fund for Children and Restless Development, who have been absolutely integral in developing this fund into what it is today. And with their support, we now have a fund which is about to grant nearly 150,000 to 8 amazing young people, the youngest of which is just 10 years old. Now, those individuals had the option of applying for up to 20,000 of unrestricted funding, which we don't need to tell you is a significant amount of money for anyone, let alone a young person, some of which may never have received any funding at all for their cause previously. And with this funding, we were really looking for the young activists, campaigners, disruptors, cooperators, and social entrepreneurs of the future who are really committed to creating communities that cover our 6 strategic priorities, such as safe, sustainable, and inclusive communities, just to mention a few. Now I'm going to pass over to Emily and Maya, who are from our youth steering group, as it's actually that group of amazing young people that have done all the hard work to create this fund. So they're going to talk you through what that process looked like in practice. So over to you, Emily and Maya.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Hi everyone, I'm Maya. I'm an Asian woman, young girl, wearing a red shirt, sitting on my dining table. And Emily, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Emily, my pronouns are she, they. I'm a white woman with long light brown hair with a plain white background.
And we're here today, and we're some of the Young Gamechangers Fund steering group, like Jenny said, and we're here today to tell you a little bit about how we, as young people making the decisions in this fund, co-designed and delivered the Young Gamechangers Fund, and how important youth-led design truly is. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about me and Emily, about the backgrounds that we bring. We leverage our own lived experience and expertise in certain areas. So for me, I have a background in social justice, decolonization, EDI, and aiding people with displacement.
Yeah, and I brought my expertise around youth leadership, experiences around neurodivergency and being LGBTQIA+, and also previous experiences around funding consultancy as well. And as Maya mentioned, these experiences that we brought to the space were really a key part of our own application process that we went through to be a part of the steering group. It wasn't just what kind of credentials we had, it was also who we are as people and those experiences that we can bring to make sure that this was as diverse and as inclusive as possible. Next slide, please, Asmina.
So like Emily just mentioned, our own lived experience was so integral to the recruitment process. We were asked what our youthopia was. So what was our ideal, utopia run by young people? And that's something that we tried to embed throughout the whole process. And the first things that we did, really, because we didn't know each other, we had to establish a collaborative working environment. We got to know each other through weekly sessions. And we had to focus on every aspect of the fund: who, what, when, where, why, because we were the how. And through these weekly sessions, we developed our knowledge of grant making, philanthropy, governance, various things, because we all have different lived experience and we all just brought it all together.
Next slide, please. Thanks. So as Maya mentioned, because we were all bringing such diverse experiences to the space, we wanted to make sure that everyone had equal footing, or as equal as possible, in our decision-making processes, and ensure that it was a safe space for everyone. So at the very start of our process, we co-created group guidelines, which was essentially to make sure that we could bring our full selves to the space. So just to talk you through some of the key points that we consolidated on as a group, we wanted to assume best intentions. We wanted to call in, not call out. So if someone said something that we didn't quite agree with, or the language wasn't inclusive as we wanted it to be, we would call in for some reflection or some conversation around that point. We wouldn't call someone out in the space. We would all be open-minded. We would use as inclusive language as possible. All of our decisions around our funding was to be decided by majority vote. So we had to make sure that the majority of the people in the room agreed with what we were deciding on, which often meant that conversations went on for a bit longer than was originally planned, but it meant that everyone was able to have a say in that space. So even if they didn't agree with that vote, people were still heard and valued in that space as well. We made sure that there was lots of reflection spaces at the end of each session, so we could kind of call on ourselves to reflect on whether we've been truly inclusive, whether, you know, we've focused on the biases that we've brought to the space, and making sure that everyone feels safe within the processes that we've taken. We obviously had a lot of respect for each other, and we built that through trust, and we focused on challenging behaviours and not individual people. So next slide, please.
So we officially started getting pen to paper in terms of the fund and the first residential in October last year in Bradford. And we had to ensure that each step of this process was like engaging, fair, and focused on EDI as well. So some of the things that we did, some of the core elements of this design approach was clarifying our purpose. What were we aiming to do? Who were we looking to fund? What was our core criteria? Why were we funding them? We had to establish timelines, things like that. Then we had to define our parameters and scope. What were our guidelines? Do we have any limitations, any restrictions? What's our deadline? Who else has to have a say in this? Who else is going to be involved in this process? And any financial conditions or guidelines that had to be addressed as well. We had to take all of that into account. We also had to establish our questions for the application. So essentially, what were we looking for in potential grantees? What would a grantee need in an application? And then we, things like budgets, action plans, what exactly were we looking for? And also we had a very long conversation that I think we might touch on a bit later about who should we prioritize. And we had a lot of debate about that. And then also we all had to confirm our choices as a collective and our aims and commitment to youth power, and essentially how we're ensuring that the design is empowering youth-led social action. How we, as Amina said, how we ensuring that these application projects are creating a legacy, and is it truly youth-led? Is it going to truly lead to long-term social change? Next slide, please.
And then the second part of our funding decision making was another residential. So a lot of our decisions, these big decisions around the fund, were made in person, where we could feel the energy of the room, we could have that trust in person. And as Maya mentioned at the start, with those weekly online sessions, they were more to develop our scope and ideas, and these residentials were more to solidify our decisions. So in our second residential, we reviewed our guidelines. So we focused on what the parameters and regulations are that we must follow, both legally and morally. We also took a lot of time to understand our unconscious and conscious biases. So we mentioned that a lot of the things we were bringing to the space were our personal experiences. And while that's brilliant and enriching, it's really important that we do that right and that we don't kind of allow our own experiences to cloud our judgments of other people's applications. So we were asking ourselves a lot about what influences our decision making. How do we make sure that while we're bringing our full selves to the space, that's not a hindrance on other people's application processes? And while all of this was happening, for about between 1 to 2 weeks, we were all reviewing applications that have been submitted by Young Gamechangers across the UK. And this was through an application review process through Evalato, where we essentially decided how we were going to vote each application, whether that was through very in-depth questioning or whether it was through a yes or no process. And through there, we were able to communicate our chosen applications. So who would we like to fund? And are there any issues with this application? So when it comes to funding young individuals, we were asking ourselves the question of, is this something that's empowering for this young people? Or is this something that's going to, give them more work to have to gain the money? Is there something that we can support them with to ensure that they can receive this funding? And then finally, we decided our Young Gamechangers Fund grantees. So this was looking around whose proposal is best aligned with their and our intended aims. So our intended aims were focusing around there being some sort of social legacy to this campaign. So once the funding's happened, what is the aftermath of that? Is this going to snowball and be something bigger? Also making sure that this is directly youth-led and there's truly young people at the forefront of this. And also making sure that, this is something that we can get funding to people who haven't received funding before. So this is really going to be impactful for the young people that we've funded, and it's not just going to the same voices and the same demographics as previously thought. Next slide, please.
So we're just going to do a little bit of reflection about how we felt over the whole process. But I think the first thing to note is that the process is ongoing. I mean, hope we are trying to create a legacy here, but even now we're still in the first process of the first funding round, in the monitoring and evaluation of that. But also that reflection was so key from conception. We were constantly reflecting, self-reflecting, and analysing our biases, unconscious biases, every eventuality, any possibility. So I think reflection is a massive part of this. So for me, how I felt excited, I felt hopeful, I felt trusted, that my lived experience was taken into account. I felt engaged because it's not just performative, it's not performative youth-led power, it's truly, intellectually stimulating, it's truly young people who are leading this process, and we truly are the ones who have the power. And I felt empowered. I think it's an amazing thing to have not just investing in the grantees, but also investing it in young people, designing the process as well.
Yeah, definitely. And to echo those feelings, I felt really excited by this whole process. It was something that was really radical and new for a lot of us in the space. A lot of our steering group hadn't been involved in anything to do with funding before. So it was really exciting for us to be a part of the behind the scenes of often us wanting to receive funding and us being able to be a part of giving people that experience. I also really felt seen and valued and challenged throughout as well, which is something that is really brilliant because it's definitely built my confidence. It's led to a lot of career progression. Different opportunities have came through this, and as Maya mentioned, when you are doing truly youth-led funding for young individuals, you're not just impacting the lives of the people you're funding, it's also the young people that you're investing in and making these decisions and being a part of this process in whatever process you take, whether it's as in-depth as the Young Gamechangers Fund, having a full steering group and residentials, or whether it's through consultancy. Whatever process you take, it's really, really great to know that there's a whole snowball effect of the young people and the marginalised communities that you'll be supporting through this type of funding. Next slide, please.
So this is just a quick infographic of the kind of geographical spread of who we funded and what sort of topics we funded. So as you can see, we funded more than 30 game changers from all over the UK, and various topics such as LGBTQ+, mental health, homelessness, gender equality, climate justice, and honestly, there's so much more we could not fit into the presentation, but it's amazing. And then we're just going to take some next slide, please. Yeah, so we've got 2 case studies of people we funded as well. So one is Tess Howard, whose business Inclusive Sportswear. She aims to make sports kit policy more inclusive, and she highlights the unnecessary need for hyper-feminine shorts, say in hockey, and things like that. And she believes that everybody belongs in sports kit and it should never be a barrier to participation. And the funding that the Young Gamechangers Fund will provide will enable the production of more inclusive sports kits and a learning platform, an online learning platform, to help build a community of sports individuals as well.
Yeah, and then another part of our funding went to Thomas Cockford, who founded Fung All CIC, which is an innovative project which involves mushroom cultivation and repurposing of urban waste into nutrition. So led by Thomas, the team aims to create a flagship farm, increasing their capacity to transform waste sustainably. So our funding will support youth training, community feeds, bioremediation projects, fostering sustainability and well-being. So the initiative addresses local food poverty and it promotes biodiversity and community engagement. So the reason that we picked these two young people to highlight as our case study is to first of all show the breadth and difference of the type of young people that we've invested in throughout this fund. Every single idea is innovative, radical, different, and often things that wouldn't usually get traditional funding. But as well as this, we really wanted to highlight the ways that young individuals identify themselves and the way that they do activism, because often when you're investing in one individual young person, they have a whole network of other young people that are ready to jump in and support them as and when they need it. So both Tess and Thomas are funded as individuals, and young people that we funded as them being the leaders of these initiatives, but they are bringing other young people and wider networks along with them through their journey of change making. So it won't only be Tess and Thomas who can receive support from us as a fund, while the monetary means go to them. If they've got young people within their network who want to access specific training around safeguarding or well-being, or any networks that we can widen for those wider young people to be involved in, then that's always possible for them as well. Because when you invest in one young person, you're also investing in their community and what they believe in. So the impact of investing in young individuals really is ridiculously big and very exciting. So next slide, please.
And yeah, echoing everything Emily said, like just to reiterate the importance of youth-led funding, like the fact that youth-led decision making is very representative of young people. It's not performative. It keeps projects, it keeps initiatives relevant. It keeps them also sustainable in the long term. Like Emily said, it creates a culture of like civic engagement. It kind of like impacts whole communities, not just the individuals that you're funding. It allows people to take ownership of their future, and I think that's one thing that as young people we're all lacking in sometimes, and that is one thing that youth-led decision making does, and it puts innovation at the forefront. Also allows us to leverage our lived experience, and that informs inclusive action. I mean, as young people making this fund who have backgrounds in creating social impact, but all the desire to create social impact, we're designing this fund for individuals who also want to create social impact. So it's a mutual partnership essentially through a fund. And yeah, it's a reflection of hope. Young people aren't just the future, they're also the present. And I think that is integral to keep in your mind when you're doing youth-led funding. It is inspirational, essentially.
Yeah, and as well as that, it opens up space for knowledge exchanges, for shared power. And when you invest in young individuals, you're also investing in grassroots activism and investing in individuals' agency as well. So next slide, please. And something that we just really wanted to end our PowerPoint on is that this process is so much bigger than just me and Maya. There were so many other young people involved in this process, both as the steering group and also the networks that we're a part of, and have, really informed the way that we come to these spaces and the things that we bring to these spaces. So when you do invest in individuals, it's not any lesser of an impact. It's actually arguably more, because it means that that young person can then go on to do so many more things. Us as a steering group, we're invested in as individuals to be a part of this process and a part of this consultancy. So it means that we haven't only been consulted with, but we've also been able to lead, and that's something that you really just can't get anywhere else. And it's really exciting that hopefully more funders can take on this initiative and move this forward, so that more people like us and beyond us can be involved in this more.
Yeah, we just want to reiterate, say thank you to everyone for listening, and then just hand it back to Asamina. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Maya. Now, we would love to have a little bit more interactive space in our session. We would like to invite, other funders, participants in this session to have your space to ask questions, share maybe your own experiences for funding individuals. We have 10 minutes for the Q&A for this part of our event today. Over to our audience. You can either hold your hand up or use the online function, or you can post your messages in the chat. Over to you, I would say. I have my own questions to ask the young people because I haven't been directly involved, during the design session. Oh, great question from the OVO Foundation. Best practice for paying young people for their involvement. I guess this is something, I don't know if Emily or Maya would like to share any thoughts of that after, having received the payment.
Yeah, I think without this being a really annoying answer, it really depends on the young people that you're working with. So whether they're, receiving any kind of income support will impact the way that they can receive money. Whether they've got different statuses that they have to identify as within government funding, so that really does impact the payments. But I can kind of share the way that we were paid with the Young Gamechangers Fund. So we were paid on a consultancy basis. So we got a contract that we signed up to. There was an option that we could receive payment through vouchers instead of just being paid with money if that impacted our income or tax. So we would just invoice like once a month for the sessions that we'd completed. But yeah, I can see Laura has the hand up, so I wonder if someone else might be able to jump in and give a more in-depth answer on that one.
I'll go to Laura in a minute. First, I would like maybe to hear some reflections from Restless or Global Fund for Children, who you've been directly involved in paying young people, not only for Young Gamechangers Fund, but in all aspects of your work. We'd love maybe to hear from you. Keith, Tim, or Catherine?
Yeah, I can just add, I think as a basic point, when we talk about accessibility, I think compensating people from time we've identified is pretty crucial to making sure that young people they can be involved, as well as kind of making sure activities are scheduled so that they can take part. And then you're respecting their kind of professional expertise. And I think that there is a practical or like legal point that, like Emily was saying, we set people up as like consultants because you need to think about, what is most appropriate, because you can think about doing things such as honorariums and per diems, but then there's sort of income tax like implications with that, and you are sort of falling into a sort of employer relationship. So making sure that we had a really clear deliverable which helps to manage expectations, so we know what are we asking them, what do they want to do, and making sure that there's a fair payment attached to that. It works legally, but then it sets the relationship up nicely, and it means that if we are ever going to ask them to do anything, we're conscious of that, and we do have to compensate them for that, and they're not just kind of there on tap as a resource to do sort of kind of interviews and tasks kind of as we go. But yeah, that's the kind of the way that we've set it up.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. So hi everyone, I'm Tim, the program manager for the YGF program. So a white man, no hair, a beard and glasses, with some artwork behind me. Yeah, I think one thing I was going to say is that I think in the context as well about how young people being paid and how what that looks like, I think it's valuing their time. And definitely Emily and Maya undersold the amount of time and effort they put into assessing the applications and committing to being part of YGF and the decision-making process. And I think that has to be valued, and that's really, really important in this context. So I think recognizing the skills and the abilities that the young people bring into that space and the value of their contributions is important to be recognized in terms of paying them. So I think that was something I wanted to particularly reference as well.
Thank you, Tim. Laura, would you like to comment or ask a question?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to ask if you could tell us a little bit more about how you went about prioritizing the different applications that you received.
So yeah, like I mentioned that was a very like contentious part of the whole process. It's something that we had like probably hours long debates on it realistically. About if who are we going to prioritize? Are we not going to prioritize? Who should we be looking to target? Are we actually going to actively target them? Are we going to explicitly say that, etc., etc.? I think the first thing we did was talk. Like I just said, we talked a lot. We established like who we want to target. So you know, certain communities that were underrepresented, certain demographics, certain geographical areas, things like that. And in the end, we Tim, just you know, make sure I'm saying this right. We didn't prioritize, did we? In the end.
We did. I suppose we did, and we did, and we didn't.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think we started with the process of like assessing is this a good application, and looking at the application on its merits, regardless of some of the other kind of things that we looked at. We received over 360 applications into YGF, so we only funded 34 projects in the end. So it's quite a big drop off. So I think our starting point was to look at actually what's the merit of the application, and from what the young people had looked at into the type of projects and things that they wanted to fund. Obviously, then what you get into when we came to the panel is the more focused thing on actually. So the panel session, when we all came together, when we had our shortlist, was more focused then on actually, okay, then so what we've got to make decisions, and there's some brilliant projects that we could have 100% funded that we weren't in a position to fund because we didn't have the money for that. So I think then you come into more focus on actually that core criteria and those ideas about what we want to fund. So that one of the things I think that Emily and Maya touched on was that idea of young people who maybe don't ordinarily get funding. So we definitely know that we have 2 projects particularly that have never received any funding before for what they do. This is the first time that they've been funded, and I think part of that came from Emily and Maya and the other steering group members looking at that approach and saying, actually, where is the value, and where is this resource best put to kind of maximize impact. And I think kind of recognizing that, so that was where we kind of got down to the point of how we decided, how we looked at the criteria that they developed and used that for final decision making.
Thank you, Tim. We have space for one more question. Okay, we have one from Kat. So for me and Emily, what are the key challenges that you faced when you were working through the creation of the fund? Did this shift when you launched the grant making process? Emily, Maya, who would like to answer this question, or if you would like some more time to think about your answers, please, do let me know.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think when we first started, one of my personal key challenges was just sheer imposter syndrome. I was like, who am I to decide whether people get funding or not? Like kind of what place do I have to be able to make such a life-changing decision? And I think, without speaking on behalf of everyone in the space, that was something that quite a lot of us did bring to the space, because a lot of us had either applied for different types of funding and not received it before, or had received it with support from others, and others were coming from an entirely different space, having no experience around funding at all. So I think a lot of our first sessions were overcoming that challenge of, really affirming ourselves as decision makers in that space, and, really creating a safe space to build trust around that. I think other key challenges that I definitely faced was needing to make the decisions quickly, but also being really thoughtful about those decisions. That I think, as you'll know, as grant makers, it's such a difficult process. Having to be constantly checking yourself, making sure that you're not bringing your own biases, making sure that you're sticking to the credentials. And also those credentials at the start were shifting for us. So when, we touched on just before about those priorities, that was really difficult for us, because then it was the question of, well, what do we mean by prioritizing? What does that look like? Does it mean that someone gets funding and someone else doesn't? Does it mean that, we tell them to apply for the next round? Do we give them feedback? So a lot of those challenges were really difficult, because a lot of the time we wanted to fund people, individuals and organisations who hadn't received funding before, but that meant that their quality of application was very different to the people who had received funding before. So that was definitely a challenge for us of keeping ourselves in check, of, you know, kind of reading between the lines of an application and seeing what the legacy could be. And I think, yeah, that's kind of what shifted throughout that process, was us getting more comfortable in our challenges and seeing our challenges as things that we can overcome, but also building that trust with each other as well, to know that, you know, we're not always going to get it perfect and there's no such thing. So just kind of, yeah, sitting in our power a little bit more to address those challenges was a key thing that we focused on throughout.
Thank you, Emily. We only have 1 more minute to answer the last question, and maybe Restless or Global Fund for Children may answer this one. What was the process for recruiting the youth steering group, and how were they supported to undertake the role?
Yeah, I might take that. Sorry, so this is Keith at Restless again. So I'm a white male with beard and short hair / balding, with a blurred background and a barking dog in the background as well. But just quickly, so we had an open recruitment process, but the key thing was that we wanted the steering group to be representative of the people we wanted the fund to reach. So we went out to kind of partners who kind of worked with the relevant sort of groups of young people, so they could disseminate it through their networks. In terms of what we were looking for, it was sort of the kind of commitment to youth social action, maybe some experience of trying to access funding, and kind of the relevant sort of lived experience as well. So it wasn't that we're expecting any kind of level of professional experience, but they kind of had the right experiences to shape the fund. So that's what we were looking for. And we had a sort of Google form that we sent out to people. And then I'd just say, then in terms of how they were supported, a key part in the co-design, co-creation process for creating the fund, the initial kind of sessions looked at sort of building them together as a group, looking at ways of working and kind of sort of talking to them about different kind of funding modalities and giving them some sort of context as well. And they were sort of supported through that process with our staff as well.
Thank you, Keith. I would like to go now to the second part of our session today, introduce the panel members of our funders and participants in the scoping study research. And I will just invite you to introduce yourselves and then we'll start the discussion. So Claire, would you like to go first?
Hi everybody, I'm Claire McGraden, I'm Director of Grants Development at Butter UK. I'm a white woman with brown hair with a blurred out background.
Thank you, Claire. Daniel?
Hi everyone, really pleased to be here today. I'm Daniel, I'm the Engagement Director at Youth Music. I'm a white man, my pronouns are he, him, and I have dark brown hair. I'm wearing a black sweatshirt and I'm in my bedroom at home.
Thank you. And Ushi?
Hi everyone, I'm Ushi Bagga. I'm the head of programme individuals at the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. I'm a middle-aged mixed heritage woman. I've got dark curly hair that's shoulder length. I'm wearing a black top, and behind me there's a cheese plant and some shelves with folders. And my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you so much. We're going to run this last part of our session today with questions to our panel members, followed by Q&A. So please, while you're listening to the discussions and contributions, do think of follow-up questions you would like to ask our funders. So I guess in the scoping study, we identified that different funders have different aspirations and motivations when they start investing in individuals. So first, I would like to invite Ushi to tell us a bit more about the funding programs that you have and what were your motivations and aspirations initially.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So funding individuals is a key aspect of the Paul Hamlyn Foundation's work. And in fact, this year we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of our Awards for Artists programme, which is a no strings attached award of £60,000 to visual artists and composers. But we're absolutely still on a learning curve. And we've got lots and lots still to understand and learn, and being part of this process and your report has been of really high value to us, and it's already beginning to impact on our thinking about how we fund individuals, and particularly really around the steering groups. So that last piece of this presentation has been really fantastic, very thought-provoking. So the majority of our funding is to individuals, is to organisations. But of course, this funding, through this funding, we're backing individuals within the organisations who want to make transformational change. So for example, thinking about Stephanie Wong, who runs At Build Change, that's supported through our migration fund, or Lavinia Stenton from the Black Curriculum that we've recently started funding through our youth and arts-based funding. But we know these organisations didn't go from just an individual having an idea to a fully fledged organisation overnight. We know it's a long journey, and there's lots of systems and processes to navigate. And we also know that those systems and processes aren't designed for everyone to navigate. Many of them are oppressive systems and intended to retain power and the status quo. And as funders, we're part of that system. From the data we've been collecting, we're beginning to gather, we know that at Paul Hamlyn Foundation, we've been underfunding organisations led by people from minoritized communities. So in terms of our motivation for funding individuals, it's to try and create alternative or new pathways through this journey and to start shifting power. It starts with people, and not the organisation, and it offers critical support at moments through that journey when there's often gaps in funding, there's no other funding around. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about two of our funding programmes. One is the Breakthrough Fund, that backs people with compelling visions for change in the arts and cultural space. They're at a critical moment in developing their ideas, and the funding's at a really large scale. It's around £30,000. And it backs them in a responsive way in order to be able to make game-changing leaps. The fund supports individuals, but often we have duos that are coming through that as well. And then Ideas and Pioneers is the fund that is about to reopen in the summer. And it's at the opposite end of the scale. So it backs people who have ideas for social change, but they're right at the beginning of developing them. When we reopen this summer, we're going to be offering grants of up to £20,000 with wraparound support from our delivery partner, Do It Now. The fund is going to focus on young people aged 80 to 30, in particular those who have experiences of the issues that their ideas are looking to address. So we think that the best ideas for systems change come from people who've been let down by existing systems and know how things can be done differently. I think it's important just to mention with Ideas and Pioneers, the fund supports individuals, but also supports small groups of people working together.
Thank you, Lucy. And as I mentioned in the beginning, in the arts sector, there's a longer tradition and experience in funding individuals. So now I'll pass to Daniel, who is also from the creative arts sector, to talk about your funding to individuals and your aspirations of the next gen. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll just introduce Youth Music because it'll make more sense when I talk about the fund, if you know what Youth Music does. So we're the largest music charity in the UK supporting young people. So our mission is about equalising access to music for young people, particularly those who might otherwise miss out due to challenges or barriers in their lives and the inequalities in society, really. So we work with young people from the very earliest stages in childhood all the way through to young adults who might be starting careers in music. And like Paul Hamlyn, we fund organisations primarily. So we're working with about 400 different organisations across the UK. We get money from Arts Council England, and then we invest that into various grassroots partners. Community centres, radio stations, prisons, hospitals, nurseries, like basically name a place where music can happen, and we're probably funding some stuff there. And our aim is really to help young people to make, learn and earn in music. And it's that last bit, the make and learn transition to earning, where this fund comes in, the Next Gen Fund. So this is about offering young creatives access to their own finance and support and grants of up to £2,500. We describe it as built for young people with a stack of ideas but a lack of finance. And they can use it to release music, launch creative projects, or launch a business. Like, it's very, very flexible. And it's about empowering young people with the finance tools and autonomy, really, to take ownership of their own journey into music. And we think the best way to do that is learning by doing. So we're kind of empowering young people to get started really. And you know, the music and creative industries are rapidly changing, and so we think it's the best way that you know, people can do that is by having the kind of scaffolding and support that we can provide, giving them that finance to really like own their creative project. And for youth music, this is the first time that we've funded individuals and funded young people. So we had quite a few aims and aspirations around what we want to achieve with that. We really wanted to create that progression opportunity from young people having taken part in, for example, a funded arts project, to then move into being able to lead their own journey, helping them build their confidence, their self-belief. And we're really making awards based on potential. We're not X Factor. We're not trying to, you know, create like the superstars of the future. We might do that, which would be lovely if it comes as a side effect. But really, we're trying to diversify the voices being heard in music and being seen, and trying to make a fairer music industry. And I guess some of the other aims that we had as a funder are similar to what we've heard already on the call from Co-op Foundation and Paul Hamlin. We want to, you know, demystify that process of applying for funding for young people, make it more accessible, democratize access, and all of those aims we probably all share.
Thank you, Daniel. And of course, when we were interviewing other funders, most of the funders suggested talking to Battle UK, because you have a long-term experience of establishing funding to individuals in need. So Claire, over to you to talk us about your aspirations behind your funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so Battle started in 1953 as an organisational and individual funder, interestingly enough, and we stopped funding organisations in the 1990s and chose to focus just on individuals. And our funding for individuals started in a very horrible description of maintenance grants as kind of where they were. But what they do now is that we focus very much on children and young people aged between 2 and 20 who are living in poverty and who've experienced traumatic crisis. And our grants are about helping those children and young people move on and rebuild their lives, their interests, their focus following the crisis. They're really flexible grants, up to about 2,400, but we have 3 aims, going back to kind of our theory of change aims, that we want our grants and aim for our grants to increase children and young people's capacity to engage in education, improve their well-being, and create a safe and nurturing home environment. And that for every child, depending on what they're going through, where the situation they're in, can look very different from grant to grant. They respond to the individual children's and child's, young person's needs.
Thank you, Claire. So now we're going to pass to the million-dollar question that most of the funders who are considering funding individuals have. Is the first thing, what are the risks to this funding, and how can you mitigate these? And in the scoping study, please do have a read. There is a big section of a whole list of risks, but also great learnings and suggestions of mitigating this. So we'd love to hear from your experience. The funders in our panel session. What are the risks that you have encountered, and have you mitigated this? So Claire, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one, and it got named, I think Maya or Emily mentioned it, which is I feel really trying to seek people who haven't benefited from support and who are in highly vulnerable circumstances. How the hell do they find you, and how do they make an application? So that's why we actually work through a network of hundreds of frontline services and charities across the UK who make applications with and on behalf of children and young people. And that's really critical, because often there may be other really significant crises that a grant alone won't help with, around housing, criminal kind of issues. There could be police involvement. There could be all sorts of things that they need someone on the ground helping them. But also working with a frontline delivery partner means that barriers such as language or literacy or technical challenges, are addressed by that support worker, so that we don't have to worry that people who don't speak English or can't access a laptop can't get access. So I think that for us is that's a really key mechanism for ensuring that our grants are getting to those children, young people who are really in highest needs. And that comes through in our data. And also we have very high numbers of children and children need plans, child protection plans, other evidence like that. Next risk is kind of, I guess, grant spend against grant purpose. people don't have the same controls as organizations. You're an individual, there can be lots of pressures around you, sometimes short-term thinking or difficult coping mechanisms, particularly when we're thinking about, you know, the families that we support and the issues. Sometimes those things can get in the way. And again, that's why for us, working with a support worker around helping a family buy the things they need, or us ordering things, are ways in which we get around. And you've talked a bit about some of those things already, Azamina. And then I guess the one that lots of people worry about with individuals is, does that individual exist? It's easier perhaps to create a fake individual than a fake charitable organisation. It is easier to create a fake individual than a fake organisation. There are a lot, I don't want to go into the mechanics of that, but there are lots of ways you can do checks, or you can just go completely high trust. But again, this is one of the reasons we work through a referrer around there. We have a registration and verification process for the organisation and referrer who's making applications. We have cross checks with line managers. We have grant award info shared with obviously the family or young person, and we have control through our grants over prepaid cards. So if you can see payments are kind of going awry, we can kind of block cards and control cards. So we've built in lots of different things. We're always learning and looking. It's kind of being risk aware, but not letting it stop the grants. We issue probably about 70 grants a week minimum, and we're moving at pace and fast, and we need to get the money out. That's what we want to do. So it's managing the risk, not letting it stop you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Great message at the end. We've seen also a varied response to this issue of possibility of misspent of the fund. Some funders are more like strict, checking every receipt. Some other operate more trust-based. They will not ask for the receipts. And if there is a possibility that the funding might be spent for something else, if it was for the well-being of the individuals, they're still happy to accept it. So there's a variety of risk, I guess, tolerance in different funders. But Daniel, over to you. Would love to hear about Youth Music's kind of thinking around risk.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it quite quick because I haven't got loads more to say than what Claire said, and I'm aware we're pressed for time. But yeah, I mean, there's some risks in terms of for the individuals we're funding, because 87% of those have never received funding before. Can be daunting, and just building on what Claire said, there's all sorts of things going on for different individuals. So, it's about us having a team who's able to support those young people with their grant and being there for them, one-to-one, being able to have calls with them, have an induction call where we introduce everybody. They've got a welcome pack, they've got signposting to external support. We try to make the funding agreement as clear as possible. We really did a lot of work on the language there. But I think the first and foremost thing that we try and get across is we're flexible and we're here. So there's a person at the end of the phone. I think then also there's organizational risks. Fraud is touched on. But I think particularly one for us is around safeguarding. So we've done a lot of work on tightening and embedding our safeguarding processes across the team, particularly those working with the Next Gen Fund. Worked with the Funders Safeguarding Collaborative on that. They've been really helpful, and also just developing really specific risk registers that filter down from the organizational risk registers to ensure that things are managed and acknowledged. There is risk there, around various things for us, from editorial to social media, the things that we see young people posting, etc. So yeah, there's quite a lot that we've had to sort of work with, but I think it's really strengthened the organizational processes, and people have really understood that yes, there is some risk here, but the tolerance for that has kind of gone up, and we understand that the benefits are huge here. So bringing on board the staff team, the leadership team, the board, it's been a really, really positive process. We have had to disinvest in a few people, but out of our 250 young people we funded so far, I can count that on two hands. So it's been pretty good.
Thank you, Daniel. And yeah, needless to say, with the 16 funders we interviewed, very few also mentioned only, a couple of cases where they had to disinvest, as you said. So we haven't located any kind of major issue from investing in individuals. Usi, would you like to share your experience on, identifying and mitigating risk?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just sort of in terms of kind of things to add, I think one for us, which has been touched on, is just around organizational risk in relation to charitable purpose. So we're a charity, as I'm sure many, if not all of the funders that are on also are. So everything that we fund has to have charitable purpose and public benefit. So obviously the most straightforward way to do that is to fund charities. But we recognise the limits of this, and so we fund organisations that are not charities, and we've been doing this for a while. So we've built up that kind of experience and expertise, and able to apply that to our work in funding individuals. So we're really careful to ensure that the work does have charitable purpose, but we're really aware of the burden that these conversations put on applicants, that bit of due diligence. So we do it right at the very end of the process. So once actually the panel have made a decision to fund, then we go back and we ask due diligence, and it's only on a few occasions that we're not able to then make the grant. And I think this is a really sort of important aspect of where the relational grant making that we're trying to do in Ideas and Pioneers, with, you know, a light touch, straightforward application process, it's sort of, it jars, or there's a sort of shift in tone where we've gone through this process and then suddenly we're asking them about charitable purpose and public benefit, and it's often, you know, using language that's unfamiliar, terminology that's alienating, and we've been thinking about this quite a lot. I actually wonder whether there's an opportunity for the funders who do support individuals that have experience of this, for us to kind of come together more around thinking about this particular aspect, and maybe you know, build some good practice or some processes, and also maybe challenge some of the things kind of that, you know, via the that are related to the Charity Commission. So I think that's potentially an opportunity there as well for us to work more collaboratively even. And then there's another aspect of risk that I just wanted to talk about, which is one of the findings when we did a strategic review in 2022 of Ideas and Pioneers is that actually the permission to take risks is a key strength of the Ideas and Pioneers Fund. And it's a key need for the people that come through that fund. So we want to offer the space to explore and to try out things, and those ideas might potentially work out, or they might not. But if somebody's explored the idea and maybe decided not to continue with it, or it hasn't actually turned out to be the right thing, we see all of that as success. We wouldn't consider that to be failure. So it's that opportunity to try and to try out things that are risky. So just wanted to add in another aspect of risk into this conversation.
Thank you all for describing actually that by thinking and mitigating risk, you have actually grown as organizations and developed and evolved over the years. That's really interesting to hear. I'm sure we're on the same trajectory as well at the COP Foundation. So I guess our next and very important question, I think from the start, we talked about inclusion, diversity, equity, different ways that funders are trying to address it. The members of the youth steering group emphasize how themselves, you know, made sure that the process was inclusive. We would love to hear from our funders now to talk to us some highlights of how you managed to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in your funding programs to individuals. And Daniel, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think it started right from the beginning. You know, it's similar to the process that your Young Gamechangers Fund has gone through in terms of like finding the community that we wanted to work with, helping them to understand what we wanted to achieve, and then involving them in the process to create the fund, create the guidelines, and really ensuring that process was integral to us creating it. And then I think it's also for us about ensuring that the pipeline of applicants is really diverse, who are coming through, and then that the application process, you know, every contact that somebody might have with the fund feels really inclusive and accessible. So Youth Music's lucky that we've got this asset of 400 frontline grassroots music projects that we can work with to inform young people about the fund and really support them as well to make applications. So quite a lot of the work we do is educating the workforce within those projects of Youth Music's offer what we're looking for, and also our offer of support. So we do one-to-ones, etc., with anybody who's interested in applying, or the team can help talk to people about their applications. And about a quarter of our applicants we're finding are coming through Youth Music Projects, so we're really lucky to have that. We've also been doing a series of community events, so for people who have taken part in Next Gen, but also who are thinking about taking part in Next Gen. So we've got 8 of those running this year. They're across the UK, and we get some of the young creators who have been funded to come and perform, and also host a panel and talk about the fund. So that gives people a chance to really find out about it kind of from their peers, and for us to bring it to life. And we're really pleased with the results of that. It's about 76% of our recipients are coming from outside of London, which is really important for us to diversify music funding across the UK. And then, as I said, it's about access first with the actual fund, so that people understand it is set up for them, and that's from the marketing to the application forms, and creating multiple ways for people to apply. And then an example of something we've done specifically with disabled people, we're really proud that 28% of people who have been awarded funding through Next Gen identify as disabled, and 39% identify as neurodivergent. We've increased the age range for people who are disabled, and we've also offered 2 separate access funds for people who identify as disabled or neurodivergent to get support with writing the application, and also to have a personal access budget when they complete their project as well. So that's separate to the grant, and that's a kind of, they tell us what they need and we're able to support that. One of the cool things is we've actually been able to fundraise with an additional partner to support just specifically that access fund, which was really good for us. And then in terms of decision making, that's also absolutely key. So echoing a lot of the conversations you had earlier with your Young Gamechangers Fund about ensuring there's a diversity of voice and lived experience. And we've got all sorts of things that we're doing to aggregate monitoring data to ensure that the funded cohort is representative. So yeah, lots of things. It's hard to encapsulate it all in a few minutes, but hopefully it gives you a flavour.
Thank you, Daniel. And your example of the additional access fund at the application stage is brilliant. I hope other funders in this call will consider doing the same. Claire, would you like to share some DI principles you have embedded in your funding?
Yes, I think we're very data rich and have always been very data focused as an organisation. So we're always kind of analysing our data constantly and cutting it in lots of different ways, looking at gender, ethnicity, geography, all sorts of things, whatever we can look at. We recently benchmarked application data over 2 years against census data, just to see actually how we actually compare to kind of England and Wales populations. And also, when you bring poverty into that, certain communities are particularly young people, more highly affected by poverty than other communities, and looked at all of that in that context, and actually found that kind of very saddening in lots of ways, but very reassuring for us. It demonstrated that we were reaching kind of very wide range communities who were most likely to be needing our support. We spotted a couple of very small groups, and now there's targeted outreach to trying to find the types of organisations who'll be working with communities that we weren't supporting, to bring them on board as referrers. And we're always looking kind of all the time about that, and then applying that outreach and kind of applying that focus. We look at kind of the language around stuff when we're making changes at the moment to kind of grants and focus. We're talking that through with our young people's group, to understand we can't bring them involved in decisions because of the way the scale and the speed we're moving, but we do bring them in to talk through criteria, purpose, scope, and they will be deeply involved. We're about to go into developing our 5-year strategy, and the young people's group are going to be in that. So it's not just the funding, it's the organisation. They recruit staff with us, they meet trustees, kind of, we test new ideas, we test new projects with them. So actually they're informing how the organisation works and how we are accountable and answerable to them, as well as how the funding responds to young people's needs.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for highlighting the importance of data and your co-creation approach. Usi, over to you to hear more about DI and your investment to individuals. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important question, and across all of our work at PHF is driven by our commitment to anti-oppression, anti-racism. We've got a lot of work to do in this area. I personally have a lot of work to do to learn and to unlearn. A key resource for this learning is Dr. Tima's Okun's work on white supremacy culture. We've been looking at these characteristics and considering how they might be showing up in the Ideas and Pioneers Fund and how we can address that. So, for example, we've been considering the impact on fear on those interested in applying, or how paternalism or one right way thinking could impact decision making about which ideas and pioneers get funded. Recently, we've been looking at individualism and how this might be showing up. And it's interesting because INP funds both individuals and small teams of people. But looking back at it's really clear that we've been placing a focus just on individuals, both in our narratives about the fund and also the process of application. So in terms of actions, we've been examining the way that we talk and we describe the fund. We're trying to acknowledge fear, trying to be as transparent as possible, and trying to create an application process that's people-centered and trauma-informed. So we're currently working with a small group of INP alumni who are sharing their experiences of being funded, and that's informing different aspects of the application process, the way that we go about our assessment and the support that we give to people. And it was really interesting listening to the conversation earlier with the youth panel, and also thinking about kind of the payment issues and contracts that were being discussed. And just finally, one thing in terms of our wraparound support, in 2023, we undertook evaluation of the support that comes alongside the money, the support that comes from our provider Do It Now. And it looked at how this support can be inclusive as possible. And the key themes that emerged were around flexibility, about the way that we welcome people and the tone that we use, the relatability of the facilitators, and clarity of communication. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Shin. Thank you for sharing links from evaluation, the importance of, collecting evidence through different processes. We did have a last question to ask and talk about, impact on individuals from the different funders, but we do have 2 or 3 minutes left, and maybe it's an opportunity for any questions from the audience. I'll open the floor. If you have any questions, you can ask through the chat or through holding your hand up. Otherwise, I'll share some, I'll ask our panel to share one key highlight of the impact and close the event. So I'll give an opportunity for 1-2 questions if you have. It's rare opportunity to have funders online in an online gathering. So please do share any reflections or any questions you have for any of the funders in our panel. Well, in this case, on which occasion, I would like to invite our panel members to share one key highlight of the impact of your funding to individuals. And Ushi, can we start from your case? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So in Ideas and Pioneers, so far we've made 250 grants. And I think not all of the ideas that were funded have flown. And as I said before, for us, that isn't something that we would consider to be a failure. But obviously, there are examples of ideas that have taken off. So Stephanie Wong, who I mentioned earlier from Act Build Change, she was funded in 2018 through Ideas and Pioneers. And it was the first time that she could go full time and employ people and work with freelancers. So obviously that organization has soared, and there's an incredible kind of impact that she and the organization are making. But I think going through that process of getting funding has also been incredibly valuable, even if the ideas haven't then taken flight. The School for Social Entrepreneur have been doing some what we call follow-on support, and that's both some additional grant funding, but also more wraparound support. And the key outcomes of that were for the pioneers were increased resilience, increased skills around relationship management, work-life balance, and leadership. So I think these are really key impacts, both on the individuals that we're funded, but also the sectors that work in.
Thank you, Sienta. Daniel, over to you for a highlight of key impact on individual creatives.
Yeah, so we've had 100 people actually complete projects now, and we've just done a bit of impact evaluation. And what's really interesting is that the young creators having a big impact, like nearly 100% are agreeing that it's helping them to make things happen, improving their confidence, improving the quality of their work, developing their entrepreneurial skills, these kinds of things that are quite self-directed. But actually the area where we found that there's good impact, but it's a bit lower, is around their connections to music industry, the creative industries, other professionals, and like networking with each other. So that little bit that's maybe slightly outside of their control, developing those networks, building that knowledge. And, you know, we know that it is quite gate-kept. And so it's interesting to see that although, you know, we're able to give them that autonomy to deliver their DIY independent projects, there's still this quite gate-kept music industry. So we knew that, but we're trying to do our best to kind of break that down. But it's interesting, like having that evidence now to see that and think about how we can make some change there. But yeah, I'll leave it there. There's loads more to dig into.
Thank you, Daniel. And over to you, Claire.
So we're supporting around 5,000 children a year at the moment who are some of the most vulnerable in the UK. And we get direct responses back from mums and from the workers, social workers and others who are helping them around grants reducing stress, helping kids engage with school, lessening bullying, sleeping, they're socialising, they're taking on activities and doing things that help them make friends, improve their mental health. So those things are really great. But there's two things always kind of stand out for me when I kind of read the evaluation and we put it together. One, that referrers consistently tell us how these grants help them establish trust with the family and help them trust the service and support around them, which can open up other kind of support for them. And that's that our grants are really critical in that bridge building, that's helping a family move on, a child and young person move on. And that families repeatedly tell us, mums and children repeatedly tell us that often our grant is the first time maybe in years that someone has actually shown belief in them and given them something that they can be positive about, and that in itself can then start to engender a kind of self-belief and self-esteem that is really helpful for them.
Thank you, Claire. Many apologies. We have overrun the session. We'll be closing down now. Just 1 minute. Stay with us. First of all, I would like to, thank you, Emily, Maya, Jenny, Tim, Catherine, Keith, and our wonderful Nick, our CEO, and our wonderful panel members, Usi, Claire, Daniel, for your contributions to the event today. Thank you for all the funders who have, come along this journey and contributed to our scoping study, and for your participation in this session today. And I would like to close with the words of one of the funders who is present actually in this event today and is closing our scoping study as well. So what they're saying, I think, Daniel, you touched on this as well when you talked about the risks. They say from the ideas development day to completing program design, trying to make everything work in terms of the risk management and the terms of conditions, it was hugely time consuming because it wasn't the norm. But the funders tells, give it a go. That's my piece of main advice to other funders, because it won't be perfect, but it is so worthwhile. It's the best bit of my job, really. I'm not saying do it and worry about it later. I'm saying do all of the planning too, but do just go for it. The more other funders that come into the space, the better. I'm sure one of the funders will identify the code, and thank you so much. And we hope to see you in other events in the future. We run an event focusing on the delivery partners relationship and the Funder Plus support in the London Funder session on the 20th of May. And I'll share later with you again the link to the scoping study and a short feedback survey, which will help us improve the sessions in the future for other funders. And yeah, thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Bye, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.